Let me squeeze in here.
You're going to get in here? I'll be on the edge. That way I can direct it. I told you I'm going to stand just to make it difficult to frame everything. We're live. What's up, everybody watching on the live stream? How you doing? We're going to talk about some DIY.
Thanks. Right.
All right, you guys ready?
Yes,
We're
absolutely.
going to go through and introduce everybody. On my right here, this is ThermalMike. Mike, is that what you want to go by today?
ThermalMike, whatever.
ThermalMike.
Hey, everybody.
Mike from ThermalMike. Austin Evans from the internet.
From the expense of the internet, yep.
And then JJ from the Asus.
The Asus.
Asus
Nice.
is a living, breathing organism.
It is the Asus. It is at this point. Asus has so many products, so many branches, but today we're going to talk about mostly ROG stuff because this is a gaming event, GameFest 2018. So
Yeah.
I've got a whole bunch of questions here, but I think the focus of this is going to be sort of what everyone out there should think about when they're building a computer, what the standard focus is now. We're going to also look to like the past, for like the past 5 or 6 years, and see where we've come, and then sort of use that as a base to look into the future and then say like, well, here's where we might be going, and here's some of the things that maybe we want, so you guys can think about that as well. So first off,
Yeah, and I'll just say, if you guys have some questions, definitely you can kind of see. We're going to try to probably cover a lot of things you might have questions about. So, I would say kind of wait it out a little bit, but, definitely we'll let Logan be able to kind of manage and see if, if you feel like you want to introduce a question, we can go ahead and break that out. But let's just kind of see how the flow goes, and we'll go from there.
yeah, we'll probably do questions at the end, but you want to take one question to start?
Yeah. Sure. I think
All right,
sure.
we'll take one question to start because you have the ROG fan hat on.
That is a really cool hat.
That is a sweet hat. That is a very cool hat.
Make it a little louder.
Everybody shut.
We'll try to see if we can talk a little bit louder for you guys to be able to hear.
Sure, sure.
But did you have a question, or was that just kind of just helping us out? Okay, no, appreciate it.
All right, so we'll try to balance it out because right now they're picking up our feed for the live stream, so we don't want to peak that. But at the same time, guys, we're at a live event here, so there's stuff going on in all directions.
We're a live stream that's live.
A live stream that's
In a live
Kind of a
environment.
prerequisite.
We're like a live.
Everything, yeah, yes. The background was not pre-recorded, and we're not pre-recorded. So first off, let's jump in and just talk about some important things that enthusiasts and builders should keep in mind when they're planning to build your computer. So what do you look at when you're first starting? We'll start with JJ.
Okay.
We'll give you 2 minutes on the clock.
You have to buy all Asus products at the very beginning. That's the number one top line.
We think you have a great experience if you definitely have some Asus hardware. I think that's probably one of the most consistent questions that anybody that goes about building a system has in mind. I think probably for me the most important thing is what's the end goal in mind? What are you really trying to achieve with the system? So for most people when they go about building a system, they probably think something in relation to budget. Now the word budget kind of gets thrown around really loosely, and it usually means, I think, a small amount of money. My perception when I talk about budget is purely a budget. It could be $500, it could be $1,000, it could be $2,000. But what's more important, I think, is really saying, what do I want out of the system? Do I want it to look a certain way? Is I'm specifically building a system to play a certain type of game? Am I going to be, doing things beyond gaming on my system? Do I want it to be a certain size? So like, usually what I tell people is kind of check off 5 things that are the most important thing that you want from that build. Once I've kind of put those things down, so I want it to be small. I want it to look cool. I want it to be able to play Fortnite, and I want to be able to play, Dota 2, right? I want it to have RGB lights, right? Whatever it might be. Once I have those things, then I kind of can jump into that next section as far as actually budgeting it out price. I think sometimes going to price and kind of going to other things before you kind of whittle those things down, ultimately sometimes limit to you. So I think first settle on those pieces, and then from there, the rest starts to kind of fill itself in.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. I think the main thing you really need to keep in mind is that you're not building to a specific budget necessarily. Figure out what you actually want to do with your system, right? So you're not doing a ton of like 3D rendering and stuff. You have a very different kind of budget. You have a very different kind of sort of parts list that you might want to do compared to someone who wants to play Blackout with you, right? So it's just like getting a good sense of like what you want to do and what you want to do in the future.
Yep.
Too, because upgradability is a key part of building any PC.
Yeah, and I think, to your point there as well, that's something that kind of we want to keep in mind from the DIY narrative. This is very different than almost any other product or experience that you build or purchase, because you have the ability to kind of have it happen variably, right? I mean, when I first started building my system, I didn't actually have enough money to be able to actually have every single component. So I actually saved money, I bought one component, and then I bought another component, because I was very specific about what I wanted to have, even though I didn't have as much knowledge as I have now, but I worked my way to kind of own that. For many other things, usually if you want, let's say, a certain camera, or if you want a certain piece of clothing, or if you want whatever it might be, it's kind of all or nothing. You kind of have to settle on, I want that product, and you tend to kind of make more compromises. But I know a lot of people that kind of like, I really want that one thing, and so like that's the cool part about it, is that with doing DIY, you have the ability to piecemeal things out, and it might take you longer, but you're going to really be able to define that or even change that over time, which there's almost really nothing else like that except for maybe kind of like DIY cars and things like that, where you have that same kind of flexibility, which is, it's interesting.
You know, this answer came naturally from both of you guys, right? People need to know what they're going to do, but I see a lot of times people going into forums, and they come into our forum, and a question is just, what's the best thing for $1,500? Right. And that's, I'm sorry, but the question is wrong, guys. Yeah. The question, I mean, I know there's no wrong question, except for there can be a question that's wrong if it doesn't get you what you need. So the question you should be asking is, what's the best thing for me, and here's what I want to do. And it's the same, it's almost like asking, like, what's the best plate of food for $100? Like, what do you like?
Right. That's a great way to say it.
What do you like to eat? Do you like sushi? Do you like hamburgers? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so what's the best hamburger for $100? That's something we can talk about, you know? Yeah. And, but then even then,
hamburger now.
Yeah. But do you want peanut butter on your hamburger? So even that's subjective. So you really need to be specific, and like he said, laying out those 5 things that you want to do, that is really important. And if you're asking, you know, people online, people on Asus forum, people on our forum, people on Reddit, put that in every time. People at home, people here, put that in when you're asking these questions, and it will help maybe people who have already built a system, or people who are, you know, professional system builders. It will help them so much when they tell you exactly what they think you should look at.
And I think one last point to kind of just add into that, that's something to keep in mind, is that the more specificity that you can kind of bring to your answer, the better. It can really help you. So like an example is like, even when you're picking, let's say, what games I want to play, be conscientious about thinking about something like, I have a very adamant policy that when I play any game that I want to play, I have this rule that I want it to look like whatever like the screenshot is from the company that released the game. That's a very ambitious goal.
Wait, you mean the E3 screenshot, or the actual screenshot?
It doesn't matter. I just want it to look like, I guess, the best case scenario that the developer intended for the game. If that even means me delaying playing the game for a period of time until I can get to that, I will actually do that, because I don't want to sacrifice that potential experience. Now you could get into the semantics as far as like gameplay is maybe more important, but for me, that's just an error, because I got more than enough games that I can always play, so I'm not hurting in terms of stopping. But that also will influence essentially your components that you're picking, because if I wanted to play at that top end of the spectrum, then that's going to define really a certain set of componentry. So even though you could have 2 people put the same exact answer of saying, I want to play, you know, Anthem is a really cool game I'm excited about, right? Yeah. I want to play Anthem the way that it looks like in the screenshots, versus I just want to have a good playing experience. 2 entirely different sets of hardware, right? Even though you're quote unquote playing the same exact game. And the last part that I'll enter that is that resolution is a really big part of this. I almost see nobody really talk about a monitor when they talk about building an entirety system, but the monitor is probably the #1 biggest effector, because the monitor will drive the requirement probably of your graphics card, and even to a degree the CPU. So you saying that I want to play a game at 1080p versus 4K has a very different experience. And even 1080p at 240 hertz versus 1080p at 60 hertz, entirely different scenarios. So again, be specific, and also always keep in that kind of backdrop of your mind the monitor that you really want to pair with this, even if that's a TV. Like if I'm building this for the living room, you know, knowing what the resolution is of your TV and the refresh rate of your TV will really help.
That's a really good point. I like the monitor idea.
Yeah.
I almost built for monitors now. When I first started building, I didn't care about the monitor at all. I was like, I found this thing at Goodwill. This just like old CRT. It came from a hospital. I don't know, but it's 22 inches and 20 hertz.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But and the gaming experience was awful. But if you qualify by saying I want to play action first-person games, then you're going to need a higher refresh rate. So build for your monitor.
Yeah.
And then that'll also, if you tell people what you want to do, they can also factor in, you know, like good ideas for monitors and stuff. So we talked about that. And now let's talk about aesthetics a little bit, because we've gotten to a point where you can get pretty good speed even on a budget these days.
For sure.
So people on a budget now can even afford to have the aesthetic they want. So let's talk about how aesthetic can factor in to some of the choices And you can still get performance with aesthetic, right, Mike?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the aesthetic look, if anything, I mean, for Thermaltake's side is definitely one of our biggest focuses. I mean, everybody's got their primary components, right? Your CPU, your motherboard, your graphics card. But is it something where you just want it to look like everybody else's? Or do you want to customize it to your own? Do you want to be able to change stuff up? Say I like the color red this day, and I want it to be white next week or whatever. Being able to have those options can really give you a lot more flexibility with the build, as well as just pulling off that aesthetic look. I mean, make it your own, right? I mean, that's what it's all about, is building a system that you can customize it to what you like, or favorite character, favorite movie, favorite comic book. I mean, there's so many crazy ideas out there that we've seen, from down to the video game that I like to play and I want my system like that, to just other stuff, and then just tying it all together. And then being able to not just tie it together, but make it look good too, right?
Right.
Yeah. A lot of stuff involved.
I totally agree. And one of the cool things about it, specifically with RGB, obviously that's a huge trend in the industry. I mean, it's been 2-3 years now since it really started.
More. I mean, I think the very first motherboard. So we were the first vendor to put motherboards, and that was Z97 era.
Was it really?
Z97 was the first. It was only one part of the motherboard,
Yeah.
but we had RGB selectable as a color choice. And so, I mean, it's continued to evolve, but I think really in the last probably 3 years, and definitely in the last 2 years alone,
everywhere.
we've seen a massive explosion.
Yeah, I mean, like I can literally look around this room right now. I mean, how many different RGB products do you see, and things that you never would see before, right? I mean, like the back of the monitor has RGB. Like, how cool is that? But I think there's more to it than just pure RGB.
For sure.
Right? I mean, like there's the other aesthetics that you should keep in mind. Do you want a huge glass window? Do you want to kind of cover it up? I mean, even very cheap cases nowadays have, full like glass.
Oh yeah, I mean, your guys' view chassis, I mean, I think are amazing.
You have glass on all sides. Even the back panels now got glass.
Which
and I know some
I wanna
people are
hide
going to be like, you know what? I want to hide all that stuff and everything. But then there's also those enthusiasts out there that do custom sleeving, and they're very precise.
I want to show
and I want to show it off, right? And I mean, we've done a little bit of where the back panel's a little bit darker than the front panel, just to give it a little bit of that contrast, So it's like it's there, but it's kind of like subdued, right? And then some other people, they just want a nice, clean look. Maybe even put some LED lights in the back there, show off those SSDs, those other hard drives, and of course your cable management. I mean, I've talked to some really crazy people that are very specific about their cable management. I mean, getting that lined up perfect and just getting it all, because they want to have the back look as good as the front.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's really interesting for me is that I've been in this industry now for easily over a decade, and I think it's not just about lighting. I think what we've seen is we've seen an evolution in that the people that are generally now building a system are inherently enthusiasts. Even if they have very little knowledge, or they're a seasoned builder like myself, they're still passionate about wanting to do it themselves. That means to me you're an enthusiast. And what that has really meant is that there's been a polish been put into the product design to really evolve its look and feel. And that's across all type of product. If you look at the identity of the materials that are used, the overall Canadian design language, like you can look inherently at an ROG product, whether it's our graphics cards, our motherboards, our monitors, our mics, anything, and it has a specific design language, just like if you look at anything from a company that has a strong design narrative. And that's part of the aesthetic focus as well. And so I think that continues to evolve, and the cool thing is you've got a lot of choice, you have a lot of flexibility, but again, you want to kind of really be conscious about this. We've seen a lot of trend to also have different form factors. So you've got like mini ITX, micro ITX, so smaller size systems, which a lot of people really like, but some of the pain points you have is that like if you go with a really small box, you almost lose all the visual identity of what you can do from showcasing a system. This is why I think that ATX, even though the form factor itself, it's over 20 years old. And it still continues to be what most of the market uses because it's the most readily identifiable in terms of how it looks and how you can make it look and easily kind of see everything that you want to. If you go to a small system, I can have a really nice, clean, kind of modern, sleek kind of profile system, or you can get some stuff where like you guys got the Core series, even mini ITX, where you can still see have a tempered glass, nice open design, but it's always going to be more restricted. You know, everything's going to kind of be kind of crunched in. So I think you kind of have a different look that you want to achieve if you go small versus kind of on that bigger side. So again, this is just really kind of getting a sense, what do you want the kind of system to look like? But I think unquestionably, you know, we did some polling, and really interesting thing is that what we've seen is that over the last 3 years, when we used to do polling, aesthetics was the smallest percentage of what used to drive people's percentage, and now it's become the largest percentage. Wow. So even over things like performance and specifications, people care more about the look. But the great thing is, when you consider an Asus part, a nice thermal take part, any of these great ports, great quality memory, like we've got some awesome, ballistics-based RGB memory kits. There's no more longer a compromise. You get great aesthetics, great performance. So it's not like sometimes where something that looks really nice inherently is going to be restricted or not perform great. Now actually the best looking stuff generally is also the best performing stuff.
Which is the way it should be.
Yeah,
right?
so it's really like you're not losing out on anything.
Yeah.
So you feel like you make some people mad who want things to be ugly. There's like a very small percentage that's online that wants everything to be ugly. And let me say something out there to the audience. If you're one of those guys who just wants a beige box in a room, do it. And if you're someone who wants RGB everywhere, do it. This is all about what you want. Have your experience, have your fun.
And I think to that point too, we do, well, this is ROG, we do also make other product categories, like we have our Prime series of products which are white, and they have a more kind of crisp, clean, monochromatic color palette. I actually think our whiteboards do the best RGB because actually RGB lighting tends to actually reflect off of a white, where on black it's absorbed, so you actually lose some of the lighting. And then we also even have our Workstation series product, which has a really clean kind of professional, I'd say kind of no nonsense kind of approach, where it's got a premium kind of sense of design and construction, but it doesn't necessarily have the more stylized kind of aesthetic you see within our gaming products. So we try to make sure that the portfolio can align with anybody, regardless of what your choice is. And again, if you don't like the lighting thing, if that turns you off, every single one of our products always has the ability, you can run it off or you can run it on. And I'll last say that I think all of our boards look great with no lighting effects, and our boards also equally look really cool with the lighting effects.
It's an addition. It's not like the entire cost of the design.
Yeah. And I want to definitely add on to that and say that too, like for all the RGB stuff that we offer and make, we also do have an off switch.
Yep.
So we want to be able to tailor it for everybody. I mean, if you want to turn one fan on or off or make them different colors, you can do everything in between there. It's not like you have to compromise to one certain thing. I mean, we've come so far from being able to have a motherboard that could hook up a simple Amazon LED strip to it and like go, oh wow, I got case lighting now. It's custom modded, right? I mean, everything is now the water blocks, the reservoirs, the fans, the lighting. I mean, they do animations now. I mean, we're in an addressable era with all of our products being able to not just make that rainbow mode, but be able to make it the color you want it, down to the very specifics. I mean, we have color code options. You guys do too, and we can sync it all up together.
Yeah, and even to that point, I mean, as much as it's gotten to where it seems like you can't do any more improvements, we're thinking about things even further and further. Like you guys have now support for Amazon Alexa, where you can actually change different options and enablement. We just finished actually certifying our Aura software with Philips Hue. So if you've got intelligent lighting in your office or in your gaming space, and you want to have that synchronized with your whole gaming environment, you can actually have that all synchronized. So we're just looking at this as an immediate as an initial foundation, but there's a whole lot more, and I think that's where the excitement is that as you get more specialized and we get more and more feedback, we can keep evolving the aesthetic narrative, not just with lighting, but also the entirety of our materials. Like we'll have a board here, if you guys don't get the chance, I definitely recommend checking out. We've got a board that we actually infused metal into the plastic material. It's called Iridium, and it allows for actually a translucence in the plastic material for the lighting, so we can inherently diffuse the lighting. It allows for a really interesting look and aesthetic. So these are all ways that when we talk about aesthetic evolution, I think lighting takes a large amount of the focus, but it's really only a small part, I think, about what all of us as vendors and even users are kind of looking at the totality of what we want to do when we define the look and feel of a system.
All right, so we talked about aesthetic, we've talked about qualifications as far as qualifying what you need in a system, and now it's time to talk about like individual components and start to break down the different sections so that we can get a little bit more granular. And also people watching at home and people here, we're going to be doing a build competition, so don't go anywhere. You guys are really going to want to see that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then someone's going to win. Someone's going to win the system.
The winning team, yes.
The winning team is going to win.
The team will be comprised of 4 people. There will be 3, let's say, non-winners, because they'll be the team captains. But 3 winners here will actually get 3 complete systems. So it's
these are pretty awesome systems too.
I got the parts right over there. We can tease them too a little bit later towards the end, so that way they can kind of see what's going to happen. But it's going to be really cool. I mean, you guys from the audience will be able to have an opportunity to be able to build a system, and the winner's going to be able to take it home. And I mean, we're talking not one system, folks. I mean, we're talking the 3 people from the winning team will each get their own system. So I think it's worth it if you guys want to hang out. Got some free food coming later. Got some more stuff. We'll be talking even more from you guys afterwards.
Can I switch and then?
I know. I want to join.
I want to do the competition.
I was hoping there was a force system, for the team captain.
All right. So after you've done all that stuff and qualified and figured out what kind of aesthetic you want to go for, let's go down the row and just see like what are the three first components, the three most important components that you pick, and then you kind of base your system off of that, and then add to it afterwards. So, what are your first three components when you're building a system?
Well, I would definitely say my number one component is going to be my chassis, because everything's got to fit in there, right? Yep. It's the foundation of my
gotta have a
system.
house, man.
I mean, if
it
you know,
defines the look,
the look and feel of what the case is going to be is one thing, but what's going to fit inside is a completely different story.
The cooler,
I mean,
the power supply, the fan,
the size
everything.
of the motherboard. I mean, you want an EATX motherboard because you want to do SLI or you want to do crossbar, whatever, and is it going to fit in that case? Did you even think about that? A lot of people don't. They go, oh man, I got this, but it just doesn't fit, or I can't get my cables routed. So the case is definitely my number one. Motherboard would definitely be number two for me, because that's going to decide my performance. That's going to decide my chipset and what I'm going to be able to do with that, and what's going to be able to all plug into that, because that's everything, right? Besides it fitting in the case, being able to get that in there, and then I would say my third thing's kind of a toss-up between what CPU I'd kind of want to go with, or graphics card, but then the cooling I would say is a big thing for me. If I'm looking to do like CPU, GPU cooling separately, I want to maybe run 2 radiators instead of 1 radiator. Is it going to go in the front? Is it going to go in the top? How big can I go? I want to add fans on it. I want to do push and pull. There's a lot of things to think. So I would definitely say case, motherboard, and cooling would be my top 3.
Yeah, and cooling also, well, a lot of people focus on cooling to being temperatures. For me, I'm a very big person when it comes to acoustics or noise. So
absolutely,
cooling directly ties into the noise of your overall footprint from your system as well. So even like sometimes I see people like, oh, you don't need that much cooler for the X experience, but maybe they want their system to not only always be really cool, but they want it to be so cool that it's actually always operating at little load, right? Where that cooling solution isn't essentially being stressed. That allows the system to be significantly quieter, right? So it might be maybe more than they really need in some ways, but they're prioritizing the actual acoustic experience even more than they're actually considering the temperature experience. So there's a couple of things. Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
If you upgrade, you have a much more beefy cooler which can handle a much more powerful processor, graphics, whatever you want as you go in the future.
Yeah, it's weird. I've actually found that sometimes adding a fan will bring the noise levels down, because then the other fans run at lower RPM, and there's like a difference when you're running at like 600 RPM based and like that. And then that versus like 1,000 RPM, 600 is like 5 times quieter. It's ridiculous. So
it scales really,
really it's
I think
exponential.
The other factor too that you have to play with is that, for me, when this question, we're jumping here, but I always try to be cautious, and I use a term that goes, spec doesn't always define experience. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of subtlety that goes in that. Sometimes when you purely look at a product, there's more about the totality of its experience. It sometimes is hard to define purely by the specification. So something like noise is, again, a very good example of this. Pitch, if you talk about human hearing is very sensitive to pitch. So like if you hear like a small whiny sound, it can be actually fairly low and soft in terms of its peak amplitude, in terms of how loud it sounds, but you can distinctively hear it because it's at a very specific pitch. While you actually hear a much larger like whirling sound, it might be softer, it can be much louder, it actually might not really be that grating or annoying to you because its pitch is entirely different. So the component, that's like spec doesn't define experience. There's a lot of subtlety, and this plays into every component that you buy, not only from like fans to even motherboards, where your spec doesn't always define that, and there's always kind of more story to tell in there, and that's where reviewers like you and a lot of communities and information that we try to put out hopefully helps to give you more clarity to understanding the components. But that's always something to kind of keep in the backdrop, that there might be more than just kind of what you're seeing when you're comparing two things in a cart, on an e-trailer or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess sort of my answer is similar, but I feel like I sort of look at it a slightly different way. So usually I look at what am I trying to do with this system, right? Am I trying to build something for editing? Am I trying to build something for streaming? Am I
and
trying
that
to build
drives the
something?
component.
Exactly, right? So like usually I'll start with the CPU. I feel like that's always a safe choice to go, okay, look, I need the 8-core i9. I've got to make sure that I can stream and play at the same time.
Sure.
Graphics card usually comes right below that. But then after that, really it does come down to the case, right? Because it's like, do I want a huge, massive tower? Do I want to load a ton of drives and everything? Like, cool. I want a full-size ATX case. But if that's not the case, maybe I'm saying case a lot.
I love it. If that's not the case.
That's not the case.
No.
But a lot of times you can
Go wait
build
in the
something.
room. Go wait in the room. No more puns now.
But a lot of times you can build something in a very small chassis.
Yeah.
So it just sort of depends on like what I'm doing, but I always sort of start with what am I doing, what's the main sort of purpose of the system, and kind of go down the list of, okay, what can I actually build in whatever chassis or case I have.
Well, like we talked about earlier, starting with the kind of end in mind, that's always really the biggest influencer, because even like me, if you take a look at my Steam library, like I've been loving playing something like Hollow Knight. Like we actually did a really recent stream where we talked about kind of gaming. Me building to, let's say, play a lot of, let's say, casual games, it's an entirely different type of system. I could actually be playing entirely on an iGPU, and I don't even need a discrete GPU. So even saying I want to build a gaming box, again, you really want to start with the end goal in mind of really for gaming, for that editing, for productivity, what does that look like? I think we've had some really good answers here on the components, so I'm not going to answer from a component question standpoint. I was like looking at the smaller things, so I would say when you're considering building, don't second guess your tools. There's 3 things that I would recommend to every person. Buy a very good quality screwdriver. Don't buy the cheap screwdriver that you have in a drawer or that you get for $2 at Home Depot or like Lowe's or whatever it might be.
I'm guilty.
Dad's old screwdrivers.
Spend it. My rule of thumb is if you haven't spent at least about $10 on that screwdriver, it's probably not good enough. And consider having at least 2, one called a long shank and one called a short shank. The reason why is having a long screwdriver, depending on kind of how you can angle the screwdriver, where it needs to get into, having one that's longer can really be beneficial, and then having a shorter one can also be beneficial. So very good quality screwdriver, be my first recommendation. 2, a magnetic tray. They're cheap, but they're an absolute lifesaver that when you're putting together a system, you can have it there at the side of your box and put your screws in you, and you don't have to worry about that bane that if all of a sudden you move something, you bump something, and your screws are all over the place, and you've lost them, and then you're like, I don't know where that screw is, so I can't mount this. It's so much easier. So that, and then I would say third is going to be a magnetizer. So you can get screwdrivers that are magnetically already pre-charged, but I like having a magnetizer. Again, it's cheap. Something that you can essentially take your screwdriver, you can ratchet it around in there, you can magnetize it, and then you can demagnetize as you want. All those little things will add up, and I guarantee you they will serve you so much better in terms of your experience.
If I did that for my first 15 builds, I would have been so much happier.
And the last one that I'll say, last 2 things I'll say there. One would be patience. Don't drive at the speed of what you might feel the pressure to do or what you're even seeing. The more time you take, even if it takes you twice as long to do it, you'll probably be happy that you took more time to just double check everything, read the manual, do anything. People that take more time, even if you end up spending, you're like, man, I spent way too much time doing this, you'll probably have a much better experience than rushing through anything. And the last one is for people that kind of want to do cable routing. A lot of people fall victim to buy zip ties. I try to be as conscious as I can in this environment. I don't like zip ties because they're only one-time use. You got to cut them, snap them, and then you're throwing something away that you have to deal with. So I like getting just Velcro wraps. So you can get them on all different types of widths, sizes. You can cut them if you need to be able to shave them down, but you can keep reusing them. And if you're like me, I also like getting them in different colors, so I can color code different parts of my system to different parts. So I'll have like a white one, a red one, and a black one, so I know these lines are just for my fans, these ones are just for like my SATA, this is for something else. So then if I've ever got to go back into my, back of my chassis, I can immediately go, oh, I've grouped these all together, unstrand it, again, I don't have to cut something if it's a zip tie, and I can get access to it.
That's a really good tip.
The quality of life stuff is so important. It's like, if you don't do these things, you're probably not going to enjoy the build as much. But if you do them, you're going to be like, oh, this is cool. I want to build one for my friends. Anybody else want to build a computer? And the next thing you know, you've got a little boutique shop because you followed those steps right there. You heard it here first. Now when you're a millionaire with a boutique shop with Asus and ThermalMike.
Right, absolutely. And I want to add one thing to that, if you don't mind. When you guys are out there buying your parts and everything, it's a budget, right? You guys got to save your money. You got to buy all your parts. The one thing that I, worry about with you guys is that you'll start buying all the parts and you'll start piling up in the closet. And it's going to sit there. Maybe 1 month goes by, 2 months, but then now a lot of people don't think, well, hey, I'm outside of my return policy, or I'm outside of being able to get support for it and everything. I always try to tell people, go for the big push of getting the primary components so you can at least do a breadbox test on it. Stock cooler, CPU, motherboard, RAM, power supply. Just chill with that. You got your plan, you've thought about it, you've listed it out, you've looked at it for months. But if you get those parts, don't just let them sit in your closet, right? Test them. Make sure everything's good first, then put them back in the box. And you know that once you have everything else there, you're going to be good to go. And that's one thing, like as a beginning builder or somebody that's never maybe built a system before, you're so excited, you're buying all these parts, you're spending your hard-earned money on this. And then the last thing you want to have is a bad experience with like a DOA product. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, but it's not impossible, right?
Sure.
So always something to think about besides just how everything's all going to go together. But just make sure everything's going to work. And I mean, when you jump into liquid cooling, I mean, liquid cooling is cool, right? But I mean, same thing. Test everything first. Put it all in air. Make sure it works. Play your game for whatever. Load Windows on it. Make sure everything's cool before you go and take that nice 2080 Ti water block apart or card to put a water block on it. Make sure everything's good to go right out of the box first. I definitely think it's a big thing I'd like to recommend.
I'm going to come at this from a different angle because there's a lot of people out there who are playing games, and my really important specs may not be the exact same thing, but there's also a lot of people out there making games. So if you're someone who's like making a game with Unreal Engine or Unity, I've been playing around with Unreal Engine quite a bit, and one of the things I found that's extremely important that I didn't know was going to be this important, I need super fast hard drives. I need M.2 because when you're making a game, it's not the same as a game that you're going to send out to the public. You may have 90 gigabytes worth of junk that you're going to compile down to 5, but you have all these assets that you maybe not even use. You've grabbed some stuff from the store, but whenever you're loading your project, it's like, no, I need to go have dinner and come back. This project's never going to load. And then when you're just doing anything in the engine, you have so many assets and so many components that the hard drive speed is really important. So I usually go for a super fast M.2, and that's one of my most important components. In addition to the case is really important because I like to be nice and quiet, and I do like the aesthetic because when I'm working or whatever, I like to be like, this is my stuff. This is my domain right here. This is all I like the aesthetic, so that's important too. But I want to jump into some components that people don't think about as much, especially not in the past. I'm talking about RAM. So RAM in the past, it didn't matter as much as it does today. A lot of people just went for like the aesthetics over the actual speed because 2400 megahertz RAM, you could grab that, or you could grab 3200 megahertz RAM, and it only really mattered when you were doing extreme benchmarking and stuff. But for just regular experience in game, it didn't really matter that much. You maybe see a 0.1% difference. But now, with this latest generation of both Intel and AMD CPUs, there's a little bit more of a difference. So let's start off with JJ. JJ, how important is RAM today, as far as RAM speed and RAM quality, for just a gaming build?
So it's a really interesting question, and again, I think this, we can apply it to gaming, but I think you always have to look at starting the end goal in mind. Memory is about really, I think, the experience that you want to have consistently on the system. I think as users that build their own systems have kind of progressed over the last few years, you find that kind of really, what are you really consistently doing in your system? Do you tend to kind of run your browser with 10, 14, 15, 20 tabs? Do you like having your audio desktop client running in the background? Do you want to toggle back and forth between an email client? Or you have some photos that you're also kind of working on in the background? All these things kind of consume and they sit in memory, right? And so that means you not only need to look at the speed of memory, but you need to look at the density of memory, right? A content creator like yourself, is going to have far more demands on a system than just a regular gamer might. So, they're going to be consciously looking, okay, man, I need to be looking at 32, 64 gigabytes, right? If I'm dealing with high resolution, 4K workflows, I need a lot of active memory to be able to sit in there. And there's also even flexibility on how you want to play with that. Like our latest ROG motherboards, we have software that actually allows you to create RAM disks out of memory. So you can actually install your web browser and run it directly from RAM as opposed to even running it from your SSD. And RAM is actually significantly faster than even the fastest SSDs. Or we have a RAM cache function where instead of working like a hard drive, it actually can work to accelerate and optimize the performance of your traditional SSD or traditional hard drive. So having more memory can benefit you there. I think memory partners are a key thing. Like here, the system memory that we're going to have in these systems is a really nice memory kits from Micron. Some things that you kind of want to keep in mind is validation is actually a really big part, especially for ASUS. One of the things we pride ourselves on is that Intel, who has a memory standard, it's called XMP. If you take a look at this compared to kind of other boards that are out there in the market, our level of validation for the number of modules that we actually check and we validate along with Intel, right now, even compared to let's say the closest other company out there in terms of board size to us, we out-validate them by more than 50%. So you as a consumer, what that means that if let's say there's 800 modules on the market from any companies that are out there, we're validating with significantly a larger share. That just means that your plug and play experience is going to be better because you can just pick from whatever you see out there, drop it in, and be able to assure it a more reliable operating experience. So some of the other companies out there, our validation level isn't by 50%. It might be closer to 70%. That's a huge delta, right? But I think it really comes down to, you know, what is the experience you want to have in your system? Most people are not only gaming exclusively. Are you gaming and streaming? Are you gaming content creating? Are you gaming and also, you know, taking advantage of the web? But I think, you know, beyond that, you know, just general recommendations. I think really anybody that's probably building any moderately performance-oriented system, I'd say you really want to start now with at least 16 gigabytes is my recommendation. And then as far as memory speed, I'd probably say 2400 to 2800 is kind of like a sweet spot in terms of price to density, and I think that works really, really well. And I'd say that most people that really would benefit from anything beyond that, in terms of going to like 3000, 32, 36, even now like in the new Z390 series where we can get to 4000 and above that, should really be geared towards either one, the most demanding enthusiasts that care about the most gaming performance, as well as actually content creators. Oddly enough, memory is very sensitive on bandwidth, so a lot of people that do photography and video work, there's a lot of bandwidth use. So actually memory can be very beneficial. As you bring that up, you get better performance. And there's always a debate. Some people say, oh, if you upgrade, you know, your GPU or something else, you get better performance. But for many of those people, they're not talking about just that one component. They're actually probably upgrading all those other components. So they're looking about maximizing the performance. And you also have to look at it from the lens that they're probably pairing it with a product where bumping the performance by 5%, even if that seems like a small amount, is actually very relevant to them. So as an example, if a gamer buys a 240 hertz monitor, that's at the very upper end of the spectrum. And if I'm just trying to get 10 or 15 more frames from an overclocked GPU, overclocked memory, that maybe gets me closer to being consistently in that level of performance. So that user, that's a more relevant experience for them. Where somebody really says, oh, none of that is relevant because I'm playing at this. But if you have a 60 hertz monitor or, you know, even a 120 hertz monitor, you have entirely different relative values of where that performance level should exist. So of course it doesn't make sense for you to make the investment in those higher end components. But for that other person, it totally makes more sense.
Yeah. I will say that you should keep in mind that memory is expensive right now, right?
Yeah.
It's gotten a little bit better, but it is still very expensive. And when you consider that if you're on a little bit of a lower budget, it can be really tempting to go, oh, I want, you know, the RGB RAM, I want 16 gigs, I want all this stuff. But sometimes you can get away with less, right? And a lot of games will run fine on like 8 gigs of RAM, especially on like a lower budget. But it's all about like sort of like, what are you doing with the system? I feel it's like the same point over and over again, but like, what are you doing with your system? And memory, to be fair, is one of the easiest things to upgrade, right?
Yeah,
so it's very simple to go to a faster kit or at least more later on.
Although I'd say, you know, from a motherboard manufacturer standpoint, I would definitely say that you always have to be cautious. Upgrading memory is a very simple physical process, but there's a lot of subtlety in the way that memory operates. And so, especially as you get into higher end systems that are using higher speed memory and more channels of memory, having sometimes adding memory after the fact is not always as smooth as it maybe should be. So ideally buying matched kits is generally a better experience. But you always do have the ability to add in, it just may be that you might have to adjust kind of certain parameters. But I would say also in that 8 gigs, that's not a game limitation, but it's tight. I think, you know, most people, you know, like me, I've really been loving Brave and Mozilla as my browser, but Chrome, you can eat 4 gigs of memory alone very easily. So I really think that, you know, 8, you're right. You could totally start as that
on the
minimum,
budget. On the budget
but
end.
16, I think, is
You're safe.
You're safe. Yeah.
So there's another component that doesn't get enough primetime press, and that is the power supply. We'll start with Austin. So, Austin, have you ever built a system with a non-80 plus power supply?
Oh, have I? I've built a system with 2 non-80 plus power supplies.
How did that go? Do tell.
It was-
Let us know more.
So there's this little show called Scrapyard Wars, you guys may have heard of, where the idea for that season was essentially this is a Linus Tech Tips production where you have to build a PC for the lowest budget, right? So as the name implies, it's the jankiest, the weirdest stuff. Like you're going to Craigslist, you're grabbing the most ridiculous things you can find. And I know you said
That show was irresponsible.
yeah, you should never do anything on Scrapyard
No.
Wars. Besides, I guess
It's fun to watch. It's
the
fun.
Craigslist stuff is actually kind of interesting. But
Yeah.
so at one point I think I had it was a 6990, like the old dual GPU card.
Yep.
And obviously that's a power monster.
Very
it needs
big.
a ton.
Especially for that era.
It was like 500 watts
Yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
yeah.
It needs so much power. So I was trying to get a super budget power supply, and I couldn't find anything that was remotely within budget without spending like $100, which on the show is a ton. So I ended up getting 2 really cheap, janky, garbage power supplies, cutting a hole in the top of the case and running the cables through.
Why did you do this?
Because I didn't want to spend my whole budget on the power supply. Yeah,
Do not
don't do
this
that.
at home.
Never do this ever
Never,
for any
ever.
reason. But it's technically possible. And the system worked.
It worked?
I mean, I didn't win, but the graphics card didn't like catch on fire or anything, so.
I'd like to further add on that 80 plus is very important.
Yes, you should never do what I did. Never, ever, ever.
But maybe understanding the reason why 80 plus is important to you is not necessarily specifically about the efficiency and the power delivery that you'll get from the unit itself, but it's the protections that are built in
Yes.
there. I mean, anything that's 80 plus certified, if you're dealing from something that's an 80 plus white, you know, going bronze, gold, platinum, and now titanium that we offer and everything, I mean, that's more or less on the efficiency side. But when you look at those different ranges of efficiency standards of the 80 plus, you'll also notice that some of them will have more or less of the protections on it. I mean, short circuit protection, over temperature protection. I mean, there is so many things that are involved. There's basically a classic 6 protections that are involved there. But I mean, some power supplies might still be like 80 plus bronze, but then you'd be like, oh wait, there's only like 3 different protections on there. What am I missing out of that? And a lot of that's like the little, the fine detail
hard to
stuff
see.
that you're like, oh, what's OCP? What's OPP? What's, over, there's so many different things that you can be related to it that you're like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, well, in a standard familiar scenario, more is better, right? So when you look at that stuff, it is more about just the efficiency when dealing with 80 plus than just, making sure, because if anything's going to go wrong and it's going to short out, you want your power supply to shut off immediately. You don't want it to burn all the way through and then get your motherboard, graphics card, because then you're going to be calling 3 or 4 different places saying this happened and to deal with it and everything. So making sure that you have a qualified, certified power supply, is very important on that. And that's in any power range, price range. I mean, we sell budget power supplies that are 80 plus white that still have the protection. Granted, they don't have, like a 95% efficiency rating like a titanium power supply, but you necessarily may or may not need that, right? Kind of goes back to what JJ was saying with like budget stuff and like how much am I going to spend, what am I going to do, as far as like what Austin said. I mean, you just got to kind of tie it all together, and it's important.
And it's in alignment too with the products that you buy. I mean, if you're spending, $1,000 on your processor, $1,000 on your graphics card, you probably want to have
Don't
a power
spend $100 on your power supply.
Exactly, you want to put that in line. And you get other upgrades too. I mean, it might come with, better lighting, it might come with a larger fan, it might come with a much longer warranty.
More connections.
Right? You might have modular cables.
Right.
But I think definitely the protection mechanisms you talk about is very important. I can tell you from a motherboard vendor's perspective, when we have to analyze board failure, actually the most common points of failure that come from users actually tend to be, when we analyze failure, comes from either surges, spikes, or brownouts. So these are all different types of power fluctuations. And ASUS boards have actually been for a very long time designed with special protections built into the boards. But this isn't a guarantee across the industry as a whole. So your power supply almost kind of is that last guard that can sometimes be built in there to help to offer more assurance that depending on the other components that you have in the system, they don't have enough protections, helps to add an additional layer of protection. And one other thing that a lot of people actually forget about, but it is important as you look to newer power supplies that come to the market, is that there's a lot of progression in, I'd say, power technologies. Without getting really kind of complex, both chip makers and graphics card makers have now introduced a lot of variants in terms of how the speeds of the products work. So they can work at really, really low levels to get very good power efficiency, and then they ramp up to really high levels to get the best performance. These are something that are called power states or clock states. And actually, certain power supplies are not always optimized for these types of power states. If you look at a power supply actually will tell you C6 ratings, C7 ratings, C8 ratings, C9 ratings. These ratings actually directly correlate that the power supply is designed to go down to these ultra low levels and then also ramp up to these high levels. And sometimes what we see is people make like upgrades over the years. Maybe they bought like a really nice $150 power supply, but it's from like 3 years ago, and then they build a whole brand new system, and they notice subtle little odd things, especially when their system might be overclocked. That power supply could still be a solid power supply, but it might not have certain response levels that are required to ensure the best level of performance when that processor's clocking up and clocking down. And this throws all kinds of variable pinpoints that people like, I don't know how to debug this because it only comes up when my system goes to sleep or goes to hibernation. and they blame the board or they blame some other thing. And it's not even inherently really the fault of the power supply, it's just that there's newer power technologies that aren't supported. So I always caution rolling over a power supply or rolling over certain components, always kind of reevaluating, kind of spend a little bit more time to figure out, you know, whether there's a benefit. And the reason why you don't experience these issues, let's say like in a laptop or something like that, is like when we make the latest and greatest Ultrabook to a gaming notebook, we've managed all that power requirement for you because we give you an AC adapter.
Yeah.
That AC adapter is designed and optimized to work within the power envelope, where that's different in the DIY space.
Yeah.
I've got an analogy. People love metaphors and analogies and that sort of thing. And if you're someone who, like, even after hearing everything, you're like, I still want to spend as little as possible on the power supply. Okay, this is like getting a car, whatever your car is, whatever you get, whether it's a Pinto or a Ferrari, it's like getting a car, putting bald tires on it and a generic battery and driving without insurance. That's what it's like to have a cheap power supply in your system.
Yeah.
It's the one point that can destroy the whole rest of the system. So you do not cheap out on your power supply, even if you're driving a Ford Pinto.
Yeah. And following up to JJ's point, you
Yeah.
have a very, very good point about the rollover, right?
Yeah.
Because it is a good idea to buy like a really nice power supply because you can get years of use out of
Yeah,
it.
for sure.
But you just have to be very aware
Yeah, you
of
just
those
have to
power
be-
states.
Yeah, exactly. And it's similar to kind of a monitor. Like if you make a really nice investment in a good monitor, might cost you a little bit more, right? But you can roll it over. You know,
Yeah.
like a lot of times, good chassis, good power supplies, good monitors might last you more than that first build. They can be rolled over, but you want to make sure that you're making an investment. And definitely, like I'd probably say, like a bronze PSU has less likelihood that I can roll it over as to where, like if I made an investment like in even a high quality silver or definitely like probably like a gold or a platinum, I can probably roll that over more easily and feel confident that in the next one I'm getting assurance. And the last thing I will say, people don't realize it, power supplies, and I'm sure you can probably attest to this, Mike, they, while most electrical components either work or they don't work, there is degradation of the part. So a part over its operating lifespan, it kind of goes like this. And it doesn't kind of just narrow down like this, but depending on how you're utilizing it, if it started at 850 watts and you're really heavily utilizing it, by year 3, it might not be actually able to even reach its peak level of performance anymore. It might be close to it, especially if it's a really, really good power supply. The better the power supply design, it might be able to hold that performance for a longer period of time. But it kind of does come down a bit. And so with that in mind, you kind of have to realize that that performance does come down a bit. So rolling over a power supply is also a little bit tricky depending on how much wiggle room you need within that depreciation that's occurred.
It's a very good point.
You ready to move on and talk about some cooling?
Yeah, let's talk about some cooling.
Is it cool to talk about cooling?
It's very cool.
Because cooling is another thing that when people are budgeting for their system, a lot of times they forget to save a little bit of budget for the cooling, especially if you haven't built a computer in 10, 15 years or whatever, and it's like, you know what, I've got some time, I've got some extra money from my job or whatever, I want to build a computer right now. It's important to remember to set aside a little bit of budget for the cooling because you're not going to be just using the stock cooler. That's not going to happen. That's just,
I mean, in most cases now with Intel, they don't even get it
an
out.
GPU box. I mean, or if you're just like I said, if it's just general light productivity or light gaming, you can totally use it. But again, is it going to be as quiet as you want? Is it is it going to be as cool as you want? And there's a lot of subtle things that people don't keep in mind. Like I'm in where we're at. This is pretty reasonable, but I live more inland. And in the summers, I'm easily seeing 110 degrees. My ambient temperature is a lot warmer than it might be for somebody else. So, your cooling don't just consider what you see online or what's kind of reviewed. Always account your personal consideration, your environment, and your acoustic consideration because that will heavily influence your cooling.
So I have a special thing I want to share with you guys, both on the internet and you guys here. So we're talking about cooling. We're here at ROG GameFest 2018. So us here at
Unveiling.
ThermalMike wanted to show off, this is our new 2080 Ti Plus Asus Strix water block.
Beautiful.
So this is our new water block that we'll be having available really soon because we know the 2080 Ti's are still getting out there. Maybe a couple of you guys have gotten your hands on one or might be something you're thinking about in the future. But definitely with GPU cooling, you can see such a bigger yield cooling your graphics card than even your CPU. I mean, your CPU is definitely going to give you a nice performance. You're going to get a nice, cool temperature with that. And the other thing I also want to mention too is we also include a nice backplate. This is an aluminum backplate that comes with the card, or the block I mean, so that way it's just all put in together
4
there.
millimeters thick. You heard that, right?
Yeah, you heard this, right? But one of the things too that we like about this and definitely love about partnering with Asus is that this will not just only sync up with your Asus motherboard right out of the box. I mean, it has a connector here that can go right into the 5-volt addressable header on the motherboard, and you can sync that up. You don't have to have like all Thermaltake products at the same time too. We're trying to really offer an option where users can, you know, buy and choose what they want and still get the same performance and benefit that you get if you got one item or you have several. And I think that's one of the big things that Thermaltake's trying to, you know, just push across to all of our partners is when you're dealing with liquid cooling and all the different components. I mean, we got GPU water blocks, right? We got CPU water blocks where everybody's going to be like, oh, hey, I want a water block now. Is it going to give me multiple colors? Is it going to give me any animation type options? How easy is it to use? Am I going to be able to sync it up with my Asus motherboard? I mean, stuff like this is why we've been working so closely with Asus. So that way, stuff like my CPU block, GPU block, my fans, my radiator, I mean, almost everything that we have now is addressable and synchronable with all of the Asus products that support either a 12-volt or 5-volt option. So keep that in mind too, is that like with these ones, these are a 5-volt option. So maybe if you're dealing with like a Z170 motherboard, you're probably into the 12-volt era, and then you're looking to upgrade, right? Or you're looking to go Z390. Z390 is going to give you a lot more features built in besides just the awesome performance that you'll get from CPU, memory, and storage, but being able to synchronize stuff up and then get that great look. I mean, I've seen that board JJ was showing me where it's just off and you can't, it looks like a mirror. Yeah. And then when you turn it on, it just comes alive with these awesome lines in RGB. And we're so proud to be able to synchronize all that up with you guys using this sync controller. So stuff like this, to be able to isolate all the different controllers, all the different cables, connections, little accessory parts you have to buy, we've synchronized it into one product, being able to support 9 different devices out of this.
So all your cooling solutions, so the fan,
yeah,
the
my
water
fans
block,
can
and
go
GPU.
here. I can have my water block, my LED strips, my pump, my GPU block. I can have that all plugged into here. I have an option for PWM control. I can plug this directly into my Asus motherboard for the fan side and be able to get that all synced up and then be able to get my performance fan curves and everything through one box.
And you don't have to have 10 pieces of software trying to match up the
Dude,
colors.
think about how simple this makes it to clean up your cable management in the back, give you some additional room for breathing. Because, I mean, hey, everybody knows when all those cables and everything all kind of pile up in the back, it's just a mess, and it's definitely not going to give you good airflow.
I gotta get it on.
You're like, can I close the
That's why you
channel?
look at that chassis. I need just a certain amount of space there that I can wiggle everything in there.
I never have to open up again,
I
it's
mean,
fine.
you bring up water cooling, and I think one point to there is that when you talk about water cooling, it's not just, I think, a pursuit about general temperature performance, but also I think equally about acoustics consideration. And so I think
absolutely.
I think that's another big narrative is that when we talk about cooling in general, right, is that again, you know, I think there's a balancing act of trying to find what is it you're most interested in. Are you interested in having your system run really cool? Or are you also interested in running it quiet? And if you're looking for a combination of both, that's what should be driving kind of that probably increase to go into higher and higher cooling. Is if you want kind of really quiet as well as really well cooled, it probably means you got to go to a larger type of cooling solution or even more specialized forms of cooling, whether that's a big kind of AIO or even a custom water cooling solution. But I think from our perspective, one really interesting thing to consider in the cooling and some stuff that we've done, especially for this generation, is that cooling and system utilization overall has become something that's very adaptive based on what you do. So a lot of people, when you talk about like setting up your system, when you talk about how your fans respond to your system, most fans respond to the CPU temperature. But if you actually think about it, and if you look at the way the system works, this is actually not really ideal. Your CPU temperature, even with a decent cooler, is actually fairly nominal because most games don't load a CPU very heavily. When you're web browsing, you're using general productivity applications, CPUs maybe at like 40, maybe 50% utilization, kind of varies a lot. Most of the actual true utilization a lot of times is on the graphics card. Now, if you're a content creator, the CPU will be different. You can definitely hammer the CPU. But the reason why that's important is like on our latest generation, now for multiple generations of motherboards, we have the ability that you can have your fans respond to different temperature targets. Why do you want to do that? Well, take for instance, if I've got a really nice, you know, Thermaltake view and I've got 3 front intake fans, would I rather have those fans respond to my CPU temperature or to my graphics card? I can set in the motherboard to respond to the graphics card instead, and now those fans will actually kick on to bring more intake airflow, where before, if my CPU was only running at 60 degrees, whereas my GPU was running at 80 degrees, my fans would have never spinned up. So it actually has a lot more variability and control. And one other really cool thing that we've also done for this generation is we have our new AI technology that's built in for overclocking. The really cool thing that we do here is we actually track your thermal information on how you use your system in real time. And even as your system changes over time, we can adjust the actual clock speeds for your overclock. So an example is, let's say you get your system, you press our auto overclocking, we give you, let's say, 5 gigahertz. But you get to summer, your ambient temperature goes up by 20 degrees, right? You start really heavily gaming, your cooling solution may not be able to actually handle what it used to be able to handle in the winter. Normally, that might have resulted in a crash, or might have resulted in the fans really hammering really heavy, really hard. But now, actually, our predictive AI overclocking implementation will actually drop the clock speed automatically for you, because we're tracking your thermal information, and we see that now you're reaching too high of a load, we'll drop you from, let's say, that 5 gigahertz to like 4.8 gigahertz automatically for you. So there's a lot of really cool, I'd say, benefits to be able to kind of tie in really good board level design things to whatever type of cooling solution you pick, whether it's, you know, a tower heatsink, or to whether it's a closed loop water cooling solution or a custom water cooling solution. And the last thing I'll also kind of touch on, and you guys also make some great products. We've talked about, you know, your custom water cooling and your AIO solutions, but I'd say don't forget to love heatsinks. Me, actually, still in 2 of my primary systems, I use large mass traditional tower heatsinks. I love the simplicity of a tower heatsink and the overall acoustics. They tend to be the quietest solutions. Sometimes I can still, the newest pumps in most products now are very quiet in operation, but for me, if I'm trying to go for my, I think the quietest system that I could possibly want, I love a tower heatsink, a large, big tower heatsink solution. So, but again, you know, this is the great thing about DIY. You can pick and choose the choice that you're looking for.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things I like the most about like a DIY solution is that I could start with cooling my CPU, and then with my radiator, my pump, my CPU block, my tube work, hard tube, soft tube, whatever, I can always expand on it. Yep. You know, I can break my budget up into segments. You know, hey, let's cool the CPU for a little bit, or maybe I'll start with an AIO because I'm just not too sure about the liquid cooling. Yep. Go that way. You know, maybe I'll take that off, give it to a family member, put it in a second system, whatever, and then jump into the DIY side. You know, do that custom CPU water block, do that sick tubing work and everything, get that looking good, and then like, oh hey, I just picked up a new graphics card. I want to grab a water block for that, throw that into the loop. It's just 2 extra tubes. It's really not that much harder to just integrate it into your loop, but then kind of like what we talked about originally was back to the planning. Is that what you want to do? Is that your end result? And then how do you want to get there? Do you want to get there in 1 month, or do you want to get there in 6 months? And what you want to do with that. So a lot of it, again, goes back to the planning, making sure you get the proper cooling for it. And I think we both definitely have a lot of that covered. Yeah.
All right, so we're almost out of time here. Is that right, guys? We haven't even, how much time do we have back there, guys?
I think we're pretty much.
I think we're okay.
10 minutes? We can go over a little bit, 10 minutes? We got a few more things that are fun to talk about. I mean, with enthusiasts, I mean, a lot of the cooling is going to come down to the sound, like you said, but also overclocking. And if you know you can get the same components as somebody else, but get 15% better performance, and you're an enthusiast, that's what you're going to do. And that's a lot of what, you know, the ROG products are about, is just getting the maximum performance out of all your parts, and then throwing on the water blocks to push it even farther, and all that works in tandem to give you the best sound, the best performance. And, you know, it's what we do.
You get the look, you get that, you know, you tie that in with some nice coolant and everything too, you know. Yeah.
So let's go around and talk about our favorite ROG and Asus products for the last 5 years, right?
5 years.
5 years.
Oh.
Have you thought of anything yet?
Whoa.
I mean, JJ, you're in this
He
all
goes
day,
first.
every day.
Copy his answer.
Yeah, I'm going to just say the same thing he said.
I mean, you know,
I'm bringing mine up right now.
I've been with the company for over 10 years now, and I've been very, very close with ROG almost since the very beginning, and I've had a lot of input in the development team. So many of these products are almost like kind of like my digital kids in ways, you know, because I've been able to influence and be able to see so many things that I'd love to see some designs. But you know, I think probably for me, if I have to call one thing out, you know, I think it's probably the Maximus Formula series in general. If we look at it, I don't know that there's been a more defining motherboard in the entire history of all boards in the industry. Almost any key technology that probably enthusiasts appreciate was probably started on an ROG board first. We were the first vendor to enable you know, individual busless options for overclocking. Clear CMOS was an option. Color coordination options on boards. ROG series were the first to have unified color palettes. You know, they were first to introduce monochromatic color schemes, RGB lighting, addressable headers, you know, so many kind of different features. And now some of the stuff that we're doing on these boards, like like I said, infusing the Adidium metal into there, right? Customized kind of just designs, integrated I/O shields on the boards. From little small things to super big things. I just think that series for me, every time I get a new one, isolated audio. I remember working their team for 2.5 years going, I want to make audio not suck on motherboards. And we painstakingly designed and developed a whole new solution, which has now become the industry norm. Every motherboard manufacturer has implemented our same type of isolated audio approach, which I still think would make the best one. But that is something. So I think that series. Second to that, I think is probably going to be. I've been continue to be really impressed on what we do on our mini ITX, so the other end of the spectrum.
Say something for me now. I was going to go that direction.
Yeah, you only get one pick, man. Come on.
Personally, that's
He made them all.
I know, he is.
A Hallmark series. And the last one has probably been, I think, just our ROG Swift gaming monitors.
Oh yeah.
Monitors, it's like something that I think for a really long time almost nobody cared about, but then really in the last 3 years, there's been an explosion that people really see how much a monitor affects the experience that you have with your system. So I always appreciated having a great monitor because back when it was just IPS versus TNN, I loved having a high quality, high bitrate based panel because I wanted the ability to have good color fidelity, good wide viewing angles, high resolution. But now having the choice to be able to see, I look at our latest ROG monitors that have HDR, that have high resolution, low refresh rate, adaptive synchronization technologies, and I'm just a monitor just ultimately changed it. And then I think a lot of the cool stuff we do in terms of just the design language, the connectivity is really, really, really cool.
So I'm going to break the rules here.
Yeah.
I'm going to say my favorite product, at least recently, is the ROG phone.
Okay. Hey, it's ROG. We have the ROG phone demo here.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
The ROG phone, huh?
Yeah.
So I think what's cool about the ROG phone, right, is that the trend of gaming phones has really become a big one in the last, I'd say, year or two. Obviously, mobile gaming is huge, right? How many of you guys actually play games on your phone, right? Almost everybody, right?
Does anybody not?
I know, right?
Exactly. So much of gaming has moved over to the phone. I think in the early days, there's a lot of sort of apprehension of oh no, we're all going to be playing some Facebook game forever. But
right now.
mobile gaming, there's Fortnite, there's PUBG, there's real proper PC games that have been brought all the way to the phone. And that's something that's never happened before, which to me is really exciting, right? But the issue has been that phones are good, but they're not great at gaming traditionally, right? So in a phone, you're always dealing with a lot of thermal issues, right? You don't have any kind of active cooling, and especially, you don't want to be playing a game for 2 hours and your fingers are burning off, or your battery is dead. So there's definitely an interesting need in the market right now for gaming phones. And I think some of the first examples were interesting, but didn't really do much besides slap some cool gamer stuff on the back. But the ROG phone, I'll totally give you props for this, is a proper gaming phone.
It's designed with gaming in mind.
Absolutely.
It doesn't feel like a rebadge. It feels like there was a conscientious attempt to make sure there was a gaming
Oh,
product.
hey.
You got a call, bro.
Excellent.
This just
Thank
in.
you.
Hey, game time. It's game time.
Yeah, oh, perfect. I'm going to use my air triggers.
Right.
So there's a bunch of stuff I like about this phone, right? First of all, the display. This display, so basically every phone ever is a standard 60 hertz panel. You go OLED, you go IPS, whatever the case is. But this is a 90 hertz OLED. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't know, maybe your eyes are probably better than mine. I can't really see a big difference between 90 and 120, right? At 90, that's pretty much the saturation point for me. So seeing that on a phone is great. Not only just for gaming, I like just scroll.
Well, I'd much rather have, I definitely would appreciate a high refresh monitor in traditional PC because there's more benefits appreciated.
Yeah.
But in a phone, I like the balance that what we have here is having a beautiful AMOLED screen with the high refresh rate at the expense of having, I think an okay screen, but having a high refresh rate, I don't know. And then again, even if you had a potentially high refresh rate, there's not necessarily any content base that can leverage that.
For sure, and you've got to consider you're playing on a phone, right? It's difficult for a lot of games to even hit 90 hertz full stop on any phone ever, right? So I really appreciate the screen. I also like the cooling, right? And there's so many cool accessories. Can I just give a shout out to you guys for this?
Thank you.
There are so many accessories for the ROG phone. So I do a series on YouTube called Building the Ultimate, where I build the ultimate Xbox or whatever. And a lot of times I try to build the most ridiculous, over-the-top things ever. I'll go deep on Amazon trying to find some stupid cooler for an Xbox, whatever the case is. You guys did all of my work for me. I can literally do a Building the Ultimate ROG phone, literally with just 8 accessories that you guys sell.
Here's the controllers, here's the wide dock, here's the cooler.
The dual screen dock, that's crazy, right? So I don't want to go too far into this, but the ROG phone is legitimately the first gaming phone that I'm super excited about. It's really well executed. Maybe not in the last 5 years. I'm sure you guys have lots of other things. This is definitely top of mind.
It's been a product that's in, I think, when we first kicked off the internal design discussions, almost was 3 years ago.
What, really?
Yeah. So I think, heavy design work is probably closer to almost about 2 years. But the initial concept of saying, let's approach that. And even beyond mobile gaming, we're getting ready in 2019 to enter actually a new networking era that's going to allow us to actually have even full high quality PC streaming. And so I think using a phone for even gaming the PC titles that you have, whether you're using things like NVIDIA's GeForce Now experience, Shadow US gaming, what Microsoft is doing, Google has some ambitions in terms of this space too.
Yeah.
So there's actually having a product that's been purposely designed to maximize the gaming experience, regardless of whether that's an app or whether that's streamed, I think is really what we've tried to do. And I think it's a great first attempt because it doesn't feel like a first attempt. It has the polish of so many of our
to be
other
fair,
products.
ASUS is not exactly brand new to making phones,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's a little bit of experience there. You
just-
kind of
just a little bit, yeah.
Just merge it with ROG, but yeah.
Okay, so I want to basically talk a little bit about just motherboards in general from you guys. I mean, I would say the Maximus has been one of my favorite board designs. I mean, it's just because it has a nice history to it. I mean, I've been since Maximus 2, Maximus 3 days, and then just going 4, 5, 6, 9. I mean, how far they've gone with it. Just the overall layout of the board has been good. But from a case manufacturer side, I think one of the best things that I've liked the most, and it's a silly thing, but it's that I/O shield cover that's built into it.
Integrated IO shield.
Because
it would solve the pain point of
when
so
I
many.
did the P series cases, that was one of the biggest things. I was like, oh man, how do I tape that I/O shield onto the thing? And I swear it felt like Asus was just listening to my brain, and they said, hey, now it's just integrated and built into the board. And I was just like, oh my god,
It's so smart. It makes so much
it's so
sense.
simple now. And I didn't have to worry about it, and it cleaned it up. It basically completed the build of something that I felt was missing in it, besides just being able to have the integration and everything as far as all of our addressable LED stuff. But then going on a separate route and everything, last year at Computex, one of the big wow things for me was that 65-inch 4K TV. I mean, being able to see a TV that big.
It's not out yet, guys. It'll be out very soon.
We're all kind of waiting for it, but I mean, I got to see it in person, and I mean, to have G-Sync built in, it to be 144 hertz at 65-inch, I mean, it is a monster. And I mean, where a lot of people have kind of pushed a little bit to doing more of the living room gaming side and everything, I think you guys are one of the first to kind of, dig that new foundation to give people an option to have a gaming PC in more than one location.
Yeah, I mean, I think, not to go off, we're getting tight on time, but I think hopefully what you guys get the sense of, and part of what we're really excited about showing off here, is that I think anytime ROG, and I think you've had the chance to look at a lot of our products, and most of you that are ROG fans can appreciate that. I think anytime Asus and ROG steps into the ring to put essentially ROG branding on a product, we've tried over now more than a decade to really be honest and truthful to say that if we're going to put this as an ROG product, it has to truly meet a certain level of innovation, performance, quality, and functionality. And I think that's not an easy feat, because it's really hard that as you continue to grow a product portfolio, regardless of what it is, to try to say that you can match a certain level of expectation across all of that. And so that's why I think this topic is so hard, but it's been cool to be able to just hear your guys' feedback. So I think let's end it off with our last question here. And
Yeah,
we'll go
so
from there.
the last thing that we're going to talk about is really interesting to me, because we're looking to the future. We've been looking at a lot of the stuff that's going on right now and then a lot of stuff that's happening in the past. But now we're going to look like the next 5 and 10 years in the future, and just sort of maybe speculate. You can do more than speculate, and you can probably do more than speculate.
Put your
as well.
NDA cloak on.
But we're going to talk about what's coming and what we want to see. So we'll start off with Austin, because these guys already know the future.
Yeah, I was about to say, this is really unfair. So maybe if I
what
float
do
some
you want to
ideas.
see?
Yeah, well, hey.
I'll float some ideas and see, I'll read your tell, and you're like, wouldn't that be interesting?
What do you want to see in the PC DIY sphere?
A year and a half and see how much.
I was like, JJ, you should have told me.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
PC DIY, what do you want to see in the future?
Well, so I think one of the things that I guess, are we talking about specifically for PCs?
Yeah, I think let's keep it in the
On the
realm
PC side.
of the PC segment. Right?
The flying cars we're not talking about, okay? No, PC.
I mean, I'll be down
Flying
for that.
PCs, yes.
Well, one of the things is, so a large part of my audience are new to PC building, or they're sort of very unfamiliar with the concepts, right? And that's one of the things I really enjoy doing, is sort of like walking people through. And I really appreciate all the innovations, including stuff like the I/O shield, that makes it easier, right?
Simplifies.
'Cause at this point, it's not that difficult to make a PC, but there's still definitely pain points, right?
Yeah,
There's
for
still
sure.
definitely points where if you've never built a PC before, you're trying to get that CPU and you're like, I don't know, the pins are bent. So I think anything that can be done to make this thing simpler, make anything like as far as like making cable management. So I actually did a PC build off yesterday. And one of the interesting things we did to to save time was we started with a case that had all the cables pre-routed.
Yep.
So obviously that's not a completely feasible thing for a lot of systems. But it's like that simple thing alone made it so much easier to explain to someone like, oh, hey, okay, so run this weird 20-pin, 4-pin, blah, 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 blah. Like, that's such a difficult sort of concept for a lot of people to get. So anything that can make PC gaming more accessible to the average person. So it's not like, I build PCs, like, oh, you're some weird nerd. It's like, oh, no, that's a thing that I could do too.
Exactly. Yep. I 100% agree with that. I think, from my perspective, like I said, we're always working on stuff. I think the thing I'm most excited about, hopefully seeing in the future, is very close to what you're talking about. It's just more symmetry, more coordination with our partners to work on opportunities to integrate essentially products to a more seamless experience, not only from an aesthetic perspective, but from a functionality perspective and even performance. So if that means like removing cables so that things just kind of click into each other, just talking to each other, that's an option. Having more variance in kind of the aesthetic materials that we're using. So, going into more metals, more different types of renewable plastics, there's a lot of different kind of variances. So there's a lot of really cool things we're looking at, but I think it's about making it more complementary, more friendly, and more streamlined. And, definitely, hopefully we'll have some of those things coming in the future.
I think I'd like to see things move. Well, I don't expect this to happen, but the ATX form factor's been around for like 20 years or something now.
Yeah,
more than that, maybe
a long time.
I'd like to see something a little more modern that can, like you said, just hook into motherboards. Maybe even something that's wired into a system. So you take your motherboard and put it in, and it plugs in when you. That would be cool. Yep. I don't think that'll happen, but
I mean, it could.
I mean,
You're
maybe.
talking to the right
I don't know what you guys are cooking up, but.
Well, I mean, I definitely want to say both, not just for me, but for JJ as well. I mean, CES is right around the corner. There's going to be a lot of new stuff coming out for CES. You guys all know. So selfish plug for both of us. Guys, stay tuned for that. We got a lot of cool stuff coming out from both sides, and definitely more partnership and integration into it. I mean, being able to bring in like Amazon Alexa, where I don't have to use a phone app. Yep. I don't have to bring up an app on my system anymore, configure my colors and everything. I can set my profiles and tell Amazon Alexa what I want it to do. Yep. I mean, everything's going to just now become voice control, and it's not just by the motherboard and the fans and the water blocks and everything, but how our partnerships are working with other companies like Amazon Alexa, Google Home, Philips Hue and everything. I mean, think about that. I mean, you could add lighting in your house, and you can have underlighting for your cabinets and everything, and it could also just be, hey man, turn to blue, and then everything goes blue. Simple and easy, and then just being able to streamline that process, I think has been a lot of what we're both working on, so that way we can just offer a more simplistic solution to you guys to be like, I want it to do this, I just tell it and it does it. Plain and simple. I mean, I know people will want more, and we'll have that too, right? But being able to just get down to that simplistic idea of just getting everything synced up will be very important.
It'd be really cool if I could take that and use maybe a third-party app, because I know you have to have a lot of this built into the game, but imagine your entire house or your entire room changing light with the environment in the game. I've seen some things do it on the wall behind the game and stuff, but the entire room on the fly would be really cool.
We have a lot of new stuff coming, man. Sorry,
All right, guys, we're about ready to wrap it up. You guys want to stay tuned because that build contest is coming up. We're going to be giving away 3 ridiculous systems. I'm talking i7 8700. What's the motherboard in that one? Want to show that off real quick and then we'll be done?
Oh, do you want
Maxim's 11 Heroes.
We're going to show this off and then we'll be done. So yeah, good. Grab some of those things. Who wants to grab them?
You want me to grab it?
Show them off. Let's show them off.
Let's get stuff.
I'm making this go longer so you guys can see these pieces. There you go. That's what we're here for, right? We're here to check out components. Look out.
JJ down.
He's good.
All right, so what do we got here? I'm just going to hang out.
This is yours?
Let them do all the work.
I'm the voice of JJ.
Watch that motherboard.
Look out.
Let me help you. There's so many parts
Do you
here,
need a hand?
guys.
I can go find someone.
There's so many things here. So many
All right.
things. But I know with what we have, it's I don't know about you, man, but I personally, I'll throw half the stuff around, it'll still work.
Yeah, it's up.
I mean, the stuff is pretty indestructible for what you got going on, but for you guys that are here today, we got some good stuff here. I mean, this is going to be a full, complete system. If you're going to be one of the chosen people to be able to get up here, we got 3 teams going on. We're going to be starting that here soon, and the people that win the build are going to get to take these home. And this is just one of the 3, guys, so look forward to it.
Keep it tuned, guys, and they'll be coming to you not too shortly. So thanks, guys, for tuning in. Leave us some comments. Take care.
See you guys.